And today's topic is a brilliant one. It's one of my favorite ones, mastering work-life balance, or what I like to call sometimes life-work balance, because life does come first. And it's all around looking at well-being, self-care, taking care of ourselves as remote, hybrid, and virtual workers. And we're going to particularly dig into some of the time management tips and tricks from our expert panel today. So you can see some of the brand names there in front of you. We've got the panels joining from all around Europe. My name is Rowena Hennigan. If you missed that, I'm a LinkedIn top voice in remote work based in Zaragoza in Spain. You can find me under Row Remote or Rowena Hennigan on LinkedIn, and I moderate these panels regularly, which is a pleasure for SafetyWing. So you can follow me on LinkedIn. You can look up any of my content via Google. SafetyWing has sponsored today's webinar, and they provide global benefits for remote and distributed teams and workforces. Don't you just love the graphics that you see? We can see a little bit of the product roadmap here on the slides as well. So we can see that they launched remote health in 2020. We've got remote doctor as well, and some of the new things that are coming throughout 2023. Building a global social safety net for international and global citizens based around the world. So again, welcome on behalf of SafetyWing. Let's have a wee look at the agenda for today. We're going to kick off with a poll. We always run one of these polls to get a flavor of where, not just where everyone's joining us from, but the status or the state of where they are in terms of their international hiring, their borderless plans. So we're going to run a poll, then we're going to move to the panel discussion under the topic mastering work-life balance, time management tips, and we'll move to Q&A. Please don't hold back on the Q&A though. You can pop those in at any point. Charles in the back room is going to keep an eye on them there. And if we can answer them as we go, we will. If not, save them till the end and we will try and deal with them then. So just make sure to get your questions logged. So let's launch the poll and get a feel for how borderless or how many countries you're operating in as a borderless organization currently. So you see the questions there. So let's get a feel for the people that are live on the webinar, what their plans are, what their status is in terms of borderless hiring, where they have their teams and how many countries. So take your time, we'll let that run there for a minute or so. Maybe you're just along today because you're curious. You don't really have plans to become fully borderless because some remote teams work locally within geographies. And we've countries, of course, that are really big, like India, or certain countries, other countries like Australia, where we just have remote workforces within that region or within that country. You want to become borderless, or you're in 2, 3, 5, 6 or more countries. So I'll give it a minute for the answers to come through. And I'll be curious, as I always am, to see, because we've had quite a mix, and we've also seen a development over the year or so that I've been doing these webinars to see that there's actually tends to be more people, a lot of HR people join, a lot of founders join these webinars, but that they have of course advanced and evolved over recent months, and that a lot of people joining are certainly in more than 2 countries. So let's give that a chance, answer the poll, and we'll have a look at the results. So we've got a quarter who don't have any plans to become borderless. As I said, that might be for various reasons, but it's interesting to see that more than half are in 2 or more countries. And we've got a few people who are in to listen today because that's their plan. So if you're going to do that, please check out SafetyWing's offerings so they can really support the benefits for remote and distributed teams. So thank you for giving us a feel for that. And let's now take the opportunity to go over and check in with our panel and meet them all. And you can see a little bit of a presentation for them there, a little bit of an introduction in terms of where they're joining us, what their names are, what companies they represent. We're going to invite the panel to pop on their cameras, pop on their sound. I believe Daphne's in France. So calling France, this is a bit like a Eurovision panel. Jakob is in Denmark and Justine is in Liechtenstein. I'm getting my Eurovision vibes here, I believe. So this is a fully European panel and it's wonderful to welcome them all. So we're going to go around the virtual room. Jakob, we'll go to you first, then to Justine, then to Daphne. Do a wee little introduction for us. Tell us where you're joining us from today and a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So my name is Jacob, and I'm the co-founder and CEO of Butter, which is like Zoom, but for workshops and trainings and for generally more engaging meetings. I'm Danish, based in Copenhagen, and we have a fully remote team of 16 people across 7 different countries at the moment. Yep.
Fantastic. Jacob, I said Jakob. I'm sorry, Jacob. So I pronounced your name.
I like it's. I answer to both.
I get it with Rowena all the time as well, so I know how it feels. But I love that you're you're the Zoom for workshops. That's such a good way to put it so concisely. So wonderful and welcome, Justine.
I'm Justine. I work at We Work Remotely. I lead my marketing and partnerships and community and everything in between. We Work Remotely is one of the biggest remote job boards out there. And I am based in Liechtenstein, which is in the middle of Austria and Switzerland. And I guess, I don't know, I've been working remotely for 6 years. This May, I turned 6 years of working remotely. So that's nice.
Fantastic. 6 years. Working remotely were dog years. You're super old, Justine. You're super old. So welcome, and it's so cool to have someone from Liechtenstein. I think it's the first time on these webinars we've had someone based in Liechtenstein. So I'm a bit of a country nerd, so I'm really excited about it. And then over to you, lovely Daphne. Daphne and I were together in Lisbon recently. Introduce yourself, Daphne.
Hi, yes, it was so nice to see you, Rowena. It went too quick. We didn't have enough time to see each other. I'm Daphne Laforêt. I am the founder of Modern Leaders. So we help companies transition to the new world of work through asynchronous operation with advisory and also workshops. I'm based in Berlin, actually, and not in France. I'm French Canadian, so I have a French accent, based in Berlin, and I'm currently in South Africa. So I'm definitely a borderless company.
So, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
These remote
so
workers.
That was like a surprise. I'm not in Europe right now. But yeah, and I've also been working remote for over 10 years, 10, 12 years now. So it's really part of my core of my identity. Really excited to be here today.
Fantastic. And I guess it's isn't it a reflection of the remote work style and community where it doesn't really matter where you are. We're all moving around quite a lot often, and yeah, fantastic. But I know Australia and some other countries have gotten wildcards into the Eurovision, Daphne, so I'm going to see what we can do about South Africa, and I can still have my Eurovision moment if need be, if need be. So let's dive in, let's dig into the content and the discussion for today. So, as I said to those listening, you'll see us all on screen. We're going to moderate and go through some sort of layout to cover the topics today. And we're going to start off by looking at boundaries between life and work. So that's what we're going to kick off with as a topic. And as I said, I invite you to use the Q&A. Make sure that if you have any questions, if you have any comments, pop them in there. So I wanted to check in with going around the room, and I'm going to go to Justine first, then to Daphne, and then to Jacob. I'm going to ask the question around setting those boundaries between work and personal life, particularly as remote workers. What are some of your key ways, practical ways that you manage that?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, something that has worked really well is to kind of like be unapologetic about prioritizing important things for me. It's difficult. It doesn't come, like naturally. But just, like giving time to those things I care about. It can be a hobby, it can be my family, it can be friends, it can be traveling, whatever that is. I tend to prioritize that before work, and I kind of like just like work around those things. So if I want to, I don't know, go to a friend's wedding, or I want to celebrate my birthday, whatever that might be, that's like the main thing I want to do, and then I just work around that. So I think that's, like for me, it has been key in how I work and in how I finish everything I have to do in time. And yeah, I think that's like basic. Of course, like you can have a dedicated space to work, if that always helps. But like prioritizing, that's key for me.
Fantastic. So very much life comes first, those key things for you in your life. Sounds like you're very clear on them. Justine, you gave some examples there. So I really, really like that, and that you're checking in with yourself and what are those priorities. So that's a really good word, isn't it? Priorities. What are those priorities? And we can't answer that for each other. It's so individual. So some really nice learnings there. Daphne, would you add anything different?
I have a very similar experience where, to me, always been life before work, or trying to fit work around my life instead of the other way around. And this has always been my motto of how I live my life. In general, I feel like it's much easier as a remote worker in general once you have a family. Or before, when I was a remote worker and I was single, I was working on my own schedule, and I could really do whatever I wanted and kind of work at any time. I ended up always working and always be busy and not necessarily have clear times. Where now I have a family, I'm forced into this box of like 9 to 5 in the end, even if I want it or not. So it does really help to be able to have that. But in the end, it's easy to just work and then family and never really have time for yourself. And I think that remote work or flexibility really gives you the opportunity to schedule times for yourself also during the day, to have time for yourself. I think it's important to remember that you're allowed to have time for yourself also during your workday. Most companies always had breaks booked in the office for you to breathe or to go smoke a cigarette if you were a smoker. Just take a breather for yourself, and that's totally fine. And remember that you're responsible for your mental health and your space in your office at home.
Fantastic. And you brought in that piece. I mean, obviously, a family adds in those other responsibilities, but most of us have other responsibilities, whether it be even our household responsibilities, in our community, pets, whatever it may be, relationships. I mean, Justine, you referenced friends and keeping up relationships. They're all responsibilities we also have as human beings. So I really like that element on self-responsibility. And I also really like what you said about boxing it in. Daphne could certainly as a parent as well. When school pickup has to be done, school pickup has to be done, or whatever has to happen. So I hear that as well. Jacob, would you add anything different or your experience?
Yeah, I think my perspective as a startup founder might be slightly different.
Oh, yeah.
I want to know.
I mean, for me, it's work before life, and but the 60 to 80 hours, they fit in really nicely in the various phases of the week, right? I do think that remote work is one of the things that enable me, at least as a startup founder, to work incredibly hard, because I am able to wrap life around work. I'm able to go to the gym throughout the day if that's what I prefer. Go for a nice dinner with my wife if that's what I need. All of these things, you're able to wrap life way more flexibly around work when you're doing it remotely. But I mean, as you guys also say, it's all about having that personal responsibility for your own life. I think that's incredibly important to remember, especially when you're in situations when you are working as incredibly hard as you are when you're trying to build something new.
And there's the real honest take on it, really. And thank you for being so honest, because I can be here with my, oh, it's life work and it's this, that, and it's all hypothetical. But during COVID, Jacob, if you had dropped into my life, you would have said, no, it's definitely work first, because we were all confined in a place, and I totally was overworking, totally guilty. And I love that angle, because there could be people listening that are from startup, and I think it's about being conscious, isn't it? We've all given different perspectives. And as I said at the start, it's about the individual. And that piece for me, I think, is quite important, that self-respect, the self-responsibility, self-respect, where you're checking in. So in terms of boundaries, I'm going to dig down a little bit deeper. And it's not kind of on the question, so I just want you to have a little think about this, because I think it's a good way of checking in on the practical advice for people. What's your 1 or 2 non-negotiables in each remote work day when it comes to taking care of yourself? So I'm going to go to Jacob first, then to Justine, then to Daphne. Jacob.
I got two. So one thing is waking up ritual, or like so I'm a slightly earlier riser than my wife, and I always bring her coffee and a little breakfast on bed. And that's like the way that we it's kind of cutie, but maybe it's nice, right? It's one thing that kind of keeps you human, or at least keeps me human. So it's a good way to kind of start the day, and that's just non-negotiable. I don't check my Slack, I don't check my notifications before we've kind of just sat down and had a little chat and gotten started on the day nicely. I think that's an incredibly important thing. I think the other non-negotiable is so honestly, workouts or training. It's the one thing that it's another thing that kind of really helps me throughout the day in de-stressing, and going somewhere and just switching off all notifications and being just in your body, for lack of better words, for an hour at a time. So I'd say those are two of my things.
And the way you answered them is very clear that you had checked in on that they're the things that, so you passed that test, but it's interesting because sometimes people can't answer that. Sometimes they can't answer that, and I mean, even if it's a simple thing like always having water around as well, that is something that can help us throughout the day. Justine, your perspective.
For me, I'm not an early riser at all. It's so difficult for me. So for me, like my morning, like having a very slow morning where I can like cook something for myself, and that I can just like drink something and not be pressured about starting my day like immediately and without like nothing, like doing nothing before. That's so important for me. Like that's something I really, really love doing, that I like not feeling pressured to start my day. That's very, very important for me. And having something to drink always. Before I had like a small glass of water. I drink a lot of water, so I had like a small glass so that I could like actually stand up and walk around and do something, just like getting more water. That would be like my two things. Depends also. If I'm traveling, it's different, but normally
Okay. But again, knowing yourself well with that morning routine, knowing that you need to be hydrated, these are simple things. There's not going to be rocket science in this, guys, but these are things that we know that anyone listening can also adopt. Do you need to have a bigger water bottle nearby or whatever so that you're staying hydrated? How is your morning routine? How are your breaks? Some great tips there. Daphne, for you, non-negotiables?
So it is difficult, I feel like, to have time for yourself and self-care. I find it extremely difficult, maybe because of the fact that there is also family and work mixed together and a lot of things we want to do. So I love to hear, what Jacob said, and in the even higher capacity of role, you have a big team, you have a lot of people, me, it's like a very small company. So sometimes I think for me it's the most important to me, of course, is the time with my family. I try as much as possible to have no phones or nothing that happens during at least dinner time, at least that time where we are talking together and spending time together. It's so easy. Like even sometimes I will actually look at my phone quickly and see something and be like, it kind of stressed me out and then brings me back into work. But it's so hard to just even put it away, we're so addicted to our devices, and it's so easy to like, oh, I could see something right away and I could not miss it. But then, yeah, it becomes a bit addictive. So I kind of really have to focus on just what am I doing right now and be present on what I'm doing right now. But I'm struggling. Like I'm working every day to try to go away from that, definitely.
Go on, Jacob.
Yeah, like one big thing, I made this change this new year where I turned off like all my iPhone notifications for my email and Slack, like so they don't appear on my phone, so I actively have to access them. It changed everything. Like it really changed a lot for me personally, right? Because I was always checking it whenever, and just the fact that it doesn't actively provoke you, it helped me de-stress a tremendous amount. And honestly, I've not been in one situation where I regretted that.
And I can totally back up on that. And people who know me will know I do a lot of regular tech detoxes anyways, but I have two devices. I have them here. One is personal, one is work. The work and even this laptop sometimes stays often in this shared space. There's a lockup that I can put it into. So that piece of, to your point, Daphne, and I've got a young child as well, that piece that family time is family time. Not every day, there are exceptions because that's when you can beat yourself up, right? But there, in general, that's what we aim for. But I think those non-negotiables are really interesting. Here's why I asked you that question, because I was also thinking that you and all of you work with other people, you're working in teams. There's a really interesting part here. We've gotten to know you in this sort of 10, 15 minutes already in this webinar. We've gotten to get a feel for how you are, who you are as a person, your family responsibilities, etc. But how do you communicate some of those things you've shared out into your team? So the boundaries are sort of known. So even if we start with Justine, like your morning routine was really interesting to me, Justine, because if I was working with you, I'd kind of know, don't be bothering Justine before 12 o'clock, right? She's not a morning person, and you're probably better asking her something in the afternoon. Even from a productivity or response perspective, I mean, we're laughing about it, but that's a way of looking at effectiveness as well, isn't it? When someone works better during the day. So Justine, we'll start with you. Give us an idea about how you share that out with your team. Then we'll go to Jacob, and then we'll go to Daphne on that.
So I think I'm pretty lucky because most of the team is in the US. So I have like a lot of hours in the start of my day where I really don't have, like to, for example, talk with customers or companies or anything. So I'm really lucky in that way. But honestly, I think it all comes to like our team culture. Everyone is very respectful of everyone's time. I think I've gotten less I want to be productive and I want to do everything, and because the whole team is very like, okay, we know it's late where you are, so you should not be working right now. Or for example, just this past Friday, my CEO wrote to me at like 6 or something. He was like, hey, I need you to do this, but I know it's Friday, so just leave it for Monday. But like I will leave it here before I forget, right? So I also think it all comes from the team in itself. Many of the things come from myself. Sometimes I'm like, I want to do more. I want to do everything, right? But just having that support from the team where everyone is kind of like not pressuring you and not expecting you to work at 8 in the morning because I will not even answer. So yeah, I think I've been lucky in that way. I think so, that I don't really have to like express those things. Those things are already built there.
And also you're leaning into an example where, as you said, everyone's in the States, so you've got a time zone advantage happening there for the way you work, which is a bit of serendipity. Yes. As we know, it might not always be the case. So it's interesting, lovely to hear, but it's interesting to also be aware, anyone listening to managing teams, it just seems the positive side. That can work the other way, where we have people not working to their best abilities and having their quality of life impacted by that time zone. So it's an interesting point to pause on. Jacob, anything different to add to that? How do you, because your team are based all over the place, aren't they?
Yeah, right. So we're based in 2 main time zones in Asia and Europe. We tried with 3 time zones at one point, and that was incredibly difficult. With one on Pacific time. Wow. Anyways, Slack statuses, very powerful. Just be
okay.
like, when you especially when you're out of office, be very clear on Slack. We've an out of office channel as well. We have a daily stand up channel in Slack where people check in when they start the day. So that's been pretty helpful as well. We haven't fully cracked on how to get that working perfectly yet, but it's pretty good. So I say some of those things. The time zone thing is just like, honestly, overall respect for where people are based, and when it's the middle of the night, just don't expect an answer. I will say we put a large amount of responsibility on the individual. So it's not like, oh, I'm not going to DM this person because it might be midnight, or oh, I'm not going to tag that person because of their time zone. We put it on responsibility on the individual to kind of manage their own time, not on the sender, if that makes sense.
Totally, and that's back to, as remote workers, we've amazing flexibility, but we've personal responsibility as well. So that a manager and a team leader can set up all these things, but if you're still checking your Slack at 2 a.m. at night, it's a two-way street. There has to be some control from the individual there and some monitoring. Just going to dive into one thing though. When you go off for your gym time in the middle of the day, do you use those Slack channels, or what do you do practically? Or do people just know you're away from keyboard, AFK, yeah?
Not even. There's very little expectance. Like there's very little. I actually do plop it in my calendar, but there's very little expectance of people responding right away. With
beautiful, beautiful. So that I have to highlight, and this came up actually, Daphne, in a couple of sessions in running remote. So I just want to highlight it. You've set a culture where there isn't expectation. Justina sounds a lot like that as well, with your team. And that might grow over time, but for people joining that want to fast track that, if you've got a simple team charter where you set out expectations for a response on Slack, is not immediate, is not 12 hours, it's 2 days like email or whatever. You all have to agree that in your own teams and your own situations. But that's a really good way of building that liberty that people feel that they might see the message, but they're going to the gym and they'll get to it later. They'll pin it and they'll get to it later. So that's a really good example. Daphne, anything different in terms of those practicalities with your teammates?
There's something that works really well. I've seen when I've worked on many teams before, and also which I tell people as advice with your team, is to create a document of how you work. And every individual have a document that is basically a bit of like a readme document that says a bit of more of your reality. I have family, I do this, I have a dog, or I go to the gym at that time, or you can expect me to be more of a morning person or afternoon person, or even like how I like to get feedback, how I like to communicate, or I'm much better at sending me a loom or than something else, because everybody have different communication styles and different schedules. So just be able to know your team, and everybody has their kind of readme documents. You can expect a bit more what to expect from that person, like how they are working. And of course, I always try to bring people away from Slack as being the core of like where the company exists, because this is really easy to make it your headquarter and where people feel like this is where the company lives. But this kind of set the expectation of the culture of always on, that I call. So it's just always on culture where you need to be there to be not FOMO, to not miss anything, to be able to read everything that's happening in the company. But if you move that to something a bit more asynchronous, and then you create more culture of autonomy, then you can really get away from that. Sorry, there's a bit of a problem with my camera sometimes that I have. But yes, that's basically like the case. Sorry, it's good.
That's okay. We can hear you still. So that's
I use external camera, like, because I have my Mac Mini trying to be technical, like cool camera, and sometimes a bit of
better with the basic camera.
But yeah, so I think just in general, trying to switch the culture. I'm always on to a culture of autonomy, and where there's no expectation of having a one-on-one or a direct live communication happening all the time. So you should know that Jacob is going to the gym. I shouldn't know that, or I shouldn't expect to be telling, okay, I'm going to the toilet, or I'm going to have some lunch, or away from keyboard. Like it's fine. If everybody's autonomous, they don't need to be saying this all the time, and they can probably work even at night, and you won't even know about it.
Fantastic tips there. Fantastic. So I'm just going to summarize, Jacob, and then I'll come to you. So we're looking at that either. I did mention the team charter, but within that you can have a readme or more about me, where we put individuals and needs and expectations and ways of working in there, and we can detail that out. In some more advanced team charters, which sometimes turn into remote playbooks, as we know, we can have a whole section on well-being and some of the things we've been talking about. But I really like that as well, that you're emphasizing not to be living on Slack. I know certainly on some projects where I'm working with a wider team, we would move over and work on either Trello or Google Docs system, and Slack is just for exchanging maybe some messages on. So there's some really good examples and tips there for people. Jacob, did you want to add anything?
I'm afraid it might be a digression, but I'm actually really curious about this whole thing of this heavy push towards async. Because there's also a very heavy push back to office from, especially in the startup world, people saying like you cannot build a startup remotely because the serendipity and a lot of the synchronous collaboration that you're seeing in startup world will not work if you're fully async. And I can see parts of the fully async part. So at least we've tried somehow to drive like we expect people maybe not to respond within the hour, but by end of day for sure,
Yeah.
clear out at least your mentions and that kind of stuff. But I'm curious to hear, Daphne, like, do you have any, like, have you heard of this kind of push as well for like how to create collaborative serendipity, if that makes sense?
Collaborative serendipity. I love that. I think you need to create a space for it, but you did something right there. You created boundary and you created like expectation. So like, asynchronous kind of gives a bit of like flexibility, but it's good to have like, okay, I'm pushing this flow of this, for example, there's a discussion or there's a decision that needs to be taken by the next 24 hours. Everybody needs to put their feedback in the next 24 hours, and then the decision will be taken after that. Like, to give clear boundaries definitely will help you, or clear structure will help you make sure that the conversation moves on. Because if you just leave message out there, for example, in a thread-based tool, for example, you don't necessarily have guidelines of like when you should be answering by a certain time, then you might wait forever. And then what happens is there's kind of like everything slows down and you're kind of always waiting for having something, and you don't know when are we taking a decision, like when are we done with that discussion. So I think having discussion openly, but also clear structure and having somebody owning that conversation, for example,
Yes.
somebody's owning that decision or that topic, and is going to be saying, okay, right now we're finished getting feedback. Now this is a decision we're going to be taking. I'm taking a decision. I'm the one owning that project. So that usually really helps. I'm biased for the remote aspect and going back to the office because I've never worked in an office before and always worked for a remote startup pre-pandemic. So I think it's a culture definitely that is different. There's definitely a lot of benefits of the in-person. Like, I would never say that it's not good, which in the end, most remote companies should meet up sometime quarterly if it's possible. I think it's really helpful to have some creative moment together, mostly like this kind of like hackathon moment. We just want to kind of put people together and be like extremely excited and creative together for a short period of time, 2-3 days. I think it definitely makes a big difference. And I always advocated for this even before pandemic, before I started talking more about remote work. I was always saying like, no, it does help to meet in person. And the problem of isolation and lack of awareness and all of these things were existent before pandemic. Like, we were talking about that when we were speaking about remote work in conferences or explaining what remote work was. We were talking about those challenges as well. So there's still work to be done there, but you can't be a remote company, Jacob. So you can say that way. This is what you want. You can, and you have the right tool for it. Like, your tool is like amazing for engagement. So
exactly. And I think we're just hearing a lot about the pushback for political vested interests. You're not going to go into that. We're not going to go into that. But I certainly can say that I'm working, and Daphne works with remote first startups. Everyone here is remote first teams. And I definitely agree with you, Daphne. And I'm sure Justine and Jacob, you've seen it when you've met. If you meet with intent for your offsites and your retreats and everything, and you really build out, you can even also work on the virtual collaboration piece as part of an in-person so that you maximize it. I've seen that done in retreats as well. Yes. You can role play it out. You can all be on devices playing remote and get feedback. I think we all know that, and we do have bias, we're all admitting it, that it is possible. So let's move it on and keep with the well-being topic, even though everything you're saying is really, really related to well-being, because you've been really honest, Jacob, as well, about the pressure of a startup, and there could be people, founders joining in, and people who we're all under certain pressure at the moment with the economic environment, aren't we, to a point. So I think it's really interesting to think about the topic of, which seems like a dirty word or a phrase, self-care. So some people don't like that term, and I didn't use it intentionally at the start, but think about conversations you've had, even think about what we've spoken about today. Think about well-being, if that's a better term for you. So I'm just going to go around and ask you to reflect on, in the teams you work with, in the collaborations you're on, the projects, when does the topic of well-being, self-care, our health, because it's foundational for our health, that we are taking breaks, that we aren't always glued to this machine that we're on today. So going around the room, I'll go to you first, Jacob, then to Daphne, then to Justine. What are your thoughts on that sort of language around self-care and well-being? Because I do find that people are not that comfortable with it.
Oh, General thoughts. I mean, it's tremendously important. My personal biggest fear as a CEO is someone out there burning out, not taking care of themselves, right? And me not knowing. It's honestly, it's really in the darkest vestiges of my mind. So it's tremendously important, and it's not just important for the individual; it's important for the organization as well. Yeah.
And then practically then, beautiful to hear that, and you're such an empathetic and human leader saying that, but practically, is there a way in one-to-ones or day-to-day, how do you check in just to get a sense of how your team individually are doing?
I'd say a number of different things. We focus very much on time boxing, a hugely important topic in our organization, making sure that people are taking time off for themselves as well. We focus very much on paid leave, holiday, whatever, vacation, whatever you want to call it. And it's not just a maximum, it's the minimum we focus on. So we focus very much on people taking enough days off. Tremendously important. We take times off in general in Butter, like we've got several weeks off with the entire company's off, because that's the best way to force people to do that and not stress too much. And I think lastly, we have we have a number of operating principles, a bit like operationalized values. And one of the most important ones to myself is one called Never Walk Alone, which is a principle that basically says reach out to someone either if you're having a tough time, or be sure to reach out to someone if you believe that they're having a tough time, that may be work-wise, personalized, etc. So that's some of the things that we've done, at least, to make sure that people don't walk alone.
Beautiful, and there's some great ideas there for people listening. Thank you so much for sharing so honestly on that. Daphne, anything else you would add to what you already said? You struggle a little bit on the whole sort of self-care with this young family, I get it, but any other words you would use or any tips you would add to what Jacob has said, because they're very practical ideas and suggestions that people can adopt to sort of be open as leaders and accessible as leaders to support people's well-being.
Actually, I have a thought, but also a question related to what Jacob said, because in the end, I think as a leader, as a CEO, also is to lead by example and to show that you are taking time off and you are taking time. I'm wondering, are you taking time for yourself, Jacob? And are you showing that, because I feel like often the leaders themselves, they forget themselves. And then we think a lot about our people, but then we're not taking time for ourselves, and we're not showing like, no, actually I have boundaries. I have time with my family right now. Please do not reach out to me for the next 2 hours, which would be totally acceptable for our employees to do. But then ourselves, we would feel like, no, we have to always be available and everything. So I wonder, if do you forget yourself sometime? I'm not at the level of, I don't have a big company now with tons of employees. I couldn't compare for my own sake, but I'm curious, like, how are you doing?
I am look, building a startup is absurdly tough. It's the most insane thing that I've ever done, and I frequently ask myself why. And the only thing that enables me to keep on going is taking enough time off to recuperate. Right, so it's like even for work reasons, I need to make sure that I take enough time off. And yes, like we have a weekend channel where we showcase what we did in the weekend. I make sure to post pictures of me doing nice stuff in the weekend. We have a pets channel where we post pictures of pets. We have a travel channel. We have all these different things where you showcase that you're off. And I at least make sure that I showcase those things there when I do them. Am I good enough? No.
Oh yeah, it's hard. It's hard.
And
you're a new father as well, so it's very hard. No sleep at night, and like never.
Yeah, but it's interesting. We'll come to you in a second, Justine. I actually had an honest conversation with another startup founder a couple of years ago, and this same topic came up. So I'll just share what he said at the time. He said, I feel like a total hypocrite. He said, because similar to you, Jacob, he was like, this is the hardest thing I've ever done. And I know I'm working too much. But I try and role model, but I also say, I know I'm a hypocrite to my team. Please, I have more responsibility than you. Right? I am not the best role model. You should take the time even if I'm not always perfect at role modeling, taking the time. So he was putting a slightly different flavor on it that he felt more honest with. I'm not saying that's the right way. I'm just saying that that's what he was quite honest with saying, because to your point at the start, Jacob, and thanks for your honesty, you are probably working as a founder that 80 hours a week occasionally. So, you know, within sleep and maybe eating, I don't know how much time there will be. So I think what's really refreshing is your honesty, and it's not about, you know, being perfect. It's about the situation. And you obviously are very, very passionate about what you're creating, and you're creating employment. So, you know, well done. We have to put it in total context and perspective. So Justine, over to you. Any thoughts on self-care, and then anything you've seen from the team you work with in terms of monitoring that, supporting people?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I guess I bring like a very different point of view because I don't have like huge responsibilities. But what I can say, and probably if you ask this to my boss, he will be the same as you, Jacob. He will be like, I work more. I have, you know, he worries more. But something I really appreciate about the team is that whenever I have to take time off, or whenever I say like, hey, you know, like I have to take care of my niece, or I have to do this or whatever, nobody ever makes me feel guilty about it. And I think that's so important, you know, like as a team leader, manager, whatever like your responsibility is, to support your team in that way. In, you know, like if you need to take a mental day off, a mental health day off, whatever that is, you know, like that you can feel comfortable to do those things and to rest and to go on vacation or whatever that may be. Like when I travel or whatever I have to do, like everyone, you know, like cares before I go, like, okay, let's do this before you go so that we don't have to bother you while you're out. And even if I'm like, no, it's okay, like you can just like send me a message and you can like, everyone is like, no, we will not do that because you will reply because right? And so that's so important. And maybe you don't feel like you're doing enough, but if you are fostering that culture where people feel comfortable to do those things, to take time off, to feel relaxed, to even, you know, like talk to each other and say like, hey, you know, I feel like I'm starting to be burned out. Like even if you feel you're not doing that for yourself, if you're fostering that culture, that's already, you know, like a huge accomplishment. And I'm lucky to be part of a team that has helped me see that and be part of that.
Wonderful, and so many different perspectives. But I think what you've explained, Justine, is really trust in action, isn't it? So we talk a lot about trust, and that word gets used about remote work and it being intentional and full of trust and granting autonomy and all these things. But that's actually trust in action, where you've never felt, you know, you've always felt you can take that time. You don't have to ask for permission. You felt full support. So again, for people listening, trying to foster a culture of well-being and support, you're hearing from all perspectives here. So I think it's really interesting to hear it from all these different points of view. So I'm just going to take a moment before we move on to a bit more sort of the technical side of time blocking, calendar management, task batching, which is a topic in itself for the last few minutes before we go to Q&A. And I'm just checking in to see if there's any questions. So again, anything that's coming to mind listening to these wonderful experts share their perspective, their stories, their honest truths. If you'd like to ask, make sure you pop them in. Charles will take care of them, and I'm keeping an eye on the Q&A, and I'll make sure I get to those questions. So let's move over to the whole area of time blocking, calendar management. And I'm going to make my bias here. This is the thing that keeps me sane as a solopreneur. My calendar, living by my calendar, living by having, like your point there, Jacob, and a couple of other people mentioned it as well, having those breaks blocked out, having certain self-care activities, massages, whatever it may be, social coffees in your calendar. So my tip for everyone is that on a Friday, as a constant reminder, on a Friday morning, I prepare for the next week and even the week after, and I block out everything in different colors. So that's just on well-being and self-care, and that serves me right since the start of the pandemic. So going to you first, Daphne, then Justine, Jacob last. What would you say on that whole idea of calendar management and time blocking. What's your perspective? Be honest. Are you good at it? Is this something you need to work on, or?
No, I think I'm quite good at blocking times because I have to. Like I think if it was just me, maybe it would be completely different. But I am a very busy person just in general, just not just business, but personally also. There's things I do also personally that I really want to take time for. So I put space for my personal things, put space for work, put space for family, put space for like I don't know for other thing. I could sleep if it's possible. But no, in the end, like I usually end up putting way too much stuff in my schedule because I try to be able to fit every minute. But no, I don't really have any tip actually. I follow a lot of people on like how they do always the morning routine before the kids wake up. Like, I never understood that because for me it was never possible. they would just wake up. Like I would just never be able to have the time for myself. So I was like, I tried everything. Like how can I get time for myself where it's just me? Like it was very difficult. And then once they're asleep, I just want to go to sleep. So then I really never actually hacked that part yet, where I have this little 1 hour of like meditation and workout and journaling. Like I cannot do that. So I'm still following the stories of others and having a fantasy. Maybe it will happen to me one day.
Maybe that'll happen when they leave home, Daphne. That's what I'm praying for. Maybe that'll happen when they leave home.
No, maybe when they get like in school age, maybe I guess. But,
maybe. Well, yours are super young. It's a little bit
small.
easier as it gets older. They're a little bit easier. But thanks for that. That's as I said, you have to live by your calendar because you've got to kind of time block it out with families, don't you? Justine, anything on calendars or time blocking from you?
I don't schedule stuff like, for example, personal stuff in my calendar. I never do that. And honestly, when I see, for example, images of people like sharing their calendars, it's just like full of activity. It just stresses me out. I don't know how people can live like following a calendar the whole time. It doesn't work for me. And so I embrace full flexibility when I don't have like, for example, meetings or stuff that it's like set, like that I really have to go there on time. I kind of like embrace flexibility in that sense. I love deep working. So whenever, like nothing is scheduled in my calendar, normally I'm working in whatever that might be. Like my role is very, I have to do many different things, many different types of activities. So I just kind of like go through like what I have to do in a day. I do plan my weeks. I do plan like, it's not that I'm just freestyling everything. I do plan my weeks and like what I have to do. I do have, like my OKRs and things like that. But that's like never ever scheduled in my calendar. Like I would never think, okay, from 11 to 12, I will work specifically on this, because that doesn't work for me. Like I know for a lot of people that works to kind of like have a structure, but for me, it just like, some days I'm just, like happier to be designing stuff, or some other days I'm happier to be having meetings. And I just go like full flexibility in that sense. I can't with a super full calendar.
Beautiful.
Yeah, I was gonna add on this. What Justine was saying is like be able to follow your flow is so precious. Like if I could go back to that, I would definitely do that. Like I think that's what's missing. Is like when you feel like you're in the flow, but you have to stop everything and do something else. So then you can. So yeah, I think it's good. It works well to follow your flow.
Totally. And I have a confession. I am the person that a couple of times a week at 5 a.m. will be up and following my flow for my writing. It's the only time I can get it done during the week with a busy family schedule. And I've gotten into that little bit of a routine. Not every morning, if I wake up naturally, I just can get a lot of my writing done in that hour. So there's follow your flow, know your your little bit of your own body clock or your time clock.
Yeah,
is also,
also it sometimes means that I am working at 9, or like I don't have a family, for example. Like, well, I have a husband, he's my family, but I don't have kids, for example. So yeah, sometimes I'm like working late, or like because I don't have this structure where I'm like, okay, I will finish working. So like it works for me. It's not something I do every day, but I understand why some people are like, I really need more. Because yeah, you can just be working in one thing for 5 hours and like no one is like stopping you. and you're just
Exactly.
doing whatever.
Exactly.
And yeah.
And I'm going to go to Jacob now, but I've also shared, there is a guide that Doist has on time blocking, which I often share in workshops. That's the full guide on time blocking. So we're all giving our perspective on it. So I'm going to ask Charles to share that in the chat as well, because there's a couple of questions that have come in. So we'll share that as well if people want to read more on the whole principles of it. But Jacob, is there anything different you'd add to the discussion at the moment?
Honestly, I'm very, very envious of all you flowers. Like, I don't, as a CEO, like, that was the last freaking thing that I ever could.
You have no flow.
Like, I miss Excel. I like Excel. That's my happy place. That was when I was in flow last. So, so anyways, I'm a calendar blocker. Like, is this like an calendar blockers anonymous or? Yeah. So I do like religiously every Sunday evening. I go through my calendar. I color code my calendar totally for all kinds of events, and I delete all the events with I was about to say with people I don't like. I do that too, but anything where I don't see that this will generate enough value for me for the week to come, and that's been a hugely beneficial thing, especially for my position, to do that. To be honest, there's so much fake work that you can end up doing that doesn't really create any value. So I think that's the biggest thing. Like this whole just be absolutely ruthless about deleting stuff from your calendar. Yeah.
Totally agree. And just to share, because my daughter has a school calendar. Daphne, yours aren't at school yet, and Jacob, you haven't entered that world yet. I actually have a color code for my daughter's events and extracurricular, so it blows my mind because sometimes her weeks are more social than mine. But honestly, we live off our calendar as a family. It's the only way. And color blocking, yes, I'm totally guilty. So that's why within a flick I could share that link from Doist, because that's how I've organized myself. Now there's some really good questions coming through, and I want to read out one that I think is a real reflection to how honest this discussion has been. Hello, I've been tuning in from the US, just outside Washington, DC. The culture here is so different. I've always wished, as the human resources person at the company I work for, to emulate more your side of the world in relation to time off and self-care. How would you suggest I start the conversation with our owner to get him to be on board with giving our employees more time off to take care of themselves and their families? So I did make a point, and I know you're in South Africa, Daphne, but we have to realize here in Europe, and I've worked for big tech companies with Canadian and American managers, where they were answering my emails and telling me to do things from cruise ships in the 90s. It used to blow my mind. They never took any time off. So I think that's a really, really good question. So does anyone want to try that? How could you, because we have to think about people across the pond. Go on, Jacob. How could we, because we've been all really honest. How could we try and convince them? Yeah, tell me.
So I've worked in Asia as well, built companies out there too, different work culture too. Honestly, the big thing, and I can say that as an owner, is basically just making it very clear that it's in the owner's own interest to do this. Like again, there's an obsession, I think I can say, in the US, and I'm incredibly impressed by a lot of things that come out of there, but I think there's an obsession with hours worked instead of actual output produced, and I think that's the way that you need to go to the conversation. So I mean, extra time off basically makes you more productive in the time that you're working.
Totally. So great. And as I said, there's a couple of more questions. So let's make sure we get to them. They're all coming in last minute here now. So one of them actually related to that is to do with the 4-day work week. So I'm just wanted to check, which is reflective on this, because the research is showing from the tests. I've been watching this really interesting closely, because the research is showing coming out of the UK and other places like Ireland that have been testing the 4-day work week. To your point, Jacob, exactly, that if you give people that focus, right, within so many days, they will get the work done. If we measure outcomes, it sometimes calls our outputs rather than hours sat at the desk, that we will get this. So I'm just wondering, does anyone have a particular opinion on 4-day work week or anything to add on that?
Honestly, I would love to try it. We work remotely. We are a pretty small company, so we need to think about things like customer support and things like that. And like since we're not that many people working, like it's not possible. But I have to say, like sometimes for me, for example, when I travel, I just take Friday off and that's it. I just like, you know, like work more the whole week and then I just take Friday off, or I just check my mail in the morning and that's it, and I just do it. But you know, like it comes from this thing where everyone is like, yeah, she's doing her work and I'm doing it, so it's not a problem.
Okay. Okay.
Just following very quickly onto that, because I think you're totally onto the right thing, Justine. I don't personally believe in the 4-day work week, because that's just forcing people to work 4 and then not work 3. It's more about kind of making sure that things are intertwined. And if you need to take a few days off because whatever, then you take a few days off because whatever, right? So yeah.
Exactly. And again, that question, if you want to reach out to me on LinkedIn, I have a few resources saved on some of the research. So reach out to me directly. I'll happily save them with you. So just bringing it into a wrap up, Daphne, there was one specific question for you, and maybe that person can reach out to you on LinkedIn, but they were asking, do you have a document sample that Daphne can share with the group regarding their work preferences, etc.? And I did share, I know Lizette Sutherland wrote the book. Yeah.
I don't have one, but I just thought that you have, I mean, I do, but there is something there that is quite good. I was just shared. I just clicked through and read through and I was like, that's pretty good. But this can be as simple as like a Google Doc or even like a GitHub document, or like, I don't know how if you were technical or not, but it can be like hosted on any different platforms. Just think about it as a document, but following this link for the structure is quite good, and you can choose what you want to include in it or not.
So we're going to finish up on time. Thank you so much. If we've missed any questions, as I said, reach out directly on LinkedIn. Thank you for being a wonderful, honest, reminding me to get away from the machine tonight, go for a walk panel to top up my own self-care. Daphne in South Africa, oh, you move around, you remote workers. Justine in Liechtenstein and Jacob in Denmark. Thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure. You can see on the screen there, if you want to get a SafetyWing demo, you can scan the QR code. It's been a pleasure on behalf of SafetyWing. What a fantastic topic. And thanks to everyone for joining in today. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.